Hello, my name is David Larson from the Faculty of Religion at Loma Linda University in Southern California, and I would like to welcome you to our continuing conversation with Dr. A. Graham Maxwell, Emeritus Professor of Biblical Studies and New Testament Interpretation at Loma Linda University and the former Dean of what we now call the Faculty of Religion on this campus. In the first portion of our conversation with Dr. Maxwell, we talked some about his theological development, his education. In the second portion of our discussion, we talked about the scientific method and the methods used by theologians and the ways in which they are surprisingly similar. In the more recent number 3 conversation, we were exploring the issue of why Jesus Christ died on the cross and what significance that life and death has for us, for other intelligent beings throughout the entire universe, and possibly for God. We hadn't quite concluded that conversation, so we'd like to begin here, and then we'll turn to the issue of religion and medicine a little further on in our discussion. It's become clearer to me that before we can have the right answers, we need to pose the proper questions. And maybe we should begin our conversation by asking Dr. Maxwell what the right questions are to ask when we encounter the cross. Graham, welcome again for the fourth and final segment of our conversation. And we now want to continue thinking about the cross, but doing so with the most helpful questions in mind, so we have the most adequate answers. What might those questions be?
Which, incidentally, I think is a very scientific approach. The scientist asks what the problem is, what's the question? And then he also has to evaluate the questions. Do they make any difference? Otherwise, you're wasting your time and your grants and everything else. So is this question very important? One way is to read the 66 through, and you'll run into them as you go along. Another way is for someone to have worked out a nice, neat, systematic theology and share it. Another way would be to read Ellen White, where she enunciates this over and over. We probably do bits and pieces of all of it. But looking back over it all, the clearest statement is right there in Romans, where it says, Jesus died to demonstrate the righteousness of God. Now, there's no question about the meaning of the words there. They're simple. This was to show, reveal, demonstrate the dikaiosune of God.
Excuse me.
Romans 3:25 and 6.
Okay.
See? No matter how you translate what goes before, propitiation and all of that, it reiterates this was to demonstrate his righteousness. Now, some may indicate their understanding of plan of salvation by preferring to translate that justice. Well, they forget that justice is just the Latin for the Greek dikaiosune. It's the same thing. There isn't a separate word here for justice. And I would say, in all fairness, you ought to leave it righteousness all the way. Like the gospel is powerful because it is about the righteousness of God, Israel. Leave it righteousness, and so on. Well, the question obviously is, why does God's righteousness have to be demonstrated? Has anybody ever questioned it? And you back up in Romans 3, and at the beginning it says, God, may you be shown to be true, though all of us be false. God, may you win your case when you take it into court. Now, Goodspeed came out with that translation, and it's wonderful. Literally, it's when men would judge you, may you be shown to have told the truth. Well, whoever suggested that God didn't tell the truth? He takes you back to Genesis. The Bible begins with the devil saying, that's a lie. You will not die. Not that God won't try. He plays both sides of this. If the soul is immortal and God is trying to kill you, you have hell. Ellen White says that's the birth of hell. Putting the immortality of the soul and the idea of a God who wants to kill. Is it true or is it false? If God is a lie, I have no basis for trusting him, and all is lost. In fact, is that an important question? Has God told the truth with respect to death? It's interesting the answer involved a death. And Jesus died to show that God had told the truth. He was shown to be true in what he had said. So there's one question. The cross demonstrates at great cost and pain that God had told the truth. Sin, defined as rebelliousness and disorderliness and so on, results in death. It doesn't say how that's caused. So that's important, because if God says, I want you to obey me, and as Paul and Jesus and Moses all said, To keep the law and obey God is to love. And love cannot be commanded, but I'll kill you if you don't. Then forget the joy of the second coming and living with God in the hereafter. Here's a God who can always hold that over our heads. I've shown you what I'll do if you don't love me. Remember that. I want love in my universe. Now, I'm not using dark speech. Dark speech softens the impact of that. But you use simple words, and that becomes unacceptable. Love me, I'll kill you. But the key thing is the number 3, which is overlooked all the time. What if I assume that, yes, sin results in death, but is at the hands of a God who in righteous indignation gives me what I deserve? How will that affect me? Is that part of the record? In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus answered the first 2 questions. Does sin result in death? He fell dying to the ground. But was it at the hands of a righteous, offended God? There's no record God ever touched him. He fell dying to the ground. Now that answered the 2 questions.
He now fell dying to the ground.
In Gethsemane.
Oh, yes.
No one touched him.
Okay.
Now Ellen White says he felt his unity with the Father breaking up and all those other things.
Yes.
He felt what the sinner will feel, and he fell dying to the ground. Why not stop there? The angel came to strengthen him, and he went out to Calvary to answer number 3. What if I come up with the wrong answer? That I must obey God under penalty of torture, which is what extended slow death is, torture, and execution. What will it do to me? And you realize there at the cross you have this incredible revelation. Jesus going through the same experience again and giving his explanation. Why have you given me up? Why have you let me go? The very words of Hosea. God was giving him up. He felt his unity with the Father breaking up. He was experiencing the sinner's death in the end, where God sadly gives us up, crying as we die, and die we will. Standing at the foot of the cross were the most dedicated group of seventh-day Sabbath-keeping, faithfully tithe-paying, even health-reforming, Bible-quoting Adventists who wanted him dead in God's name. And they were so committed to the truth of this God as they knew him that they wouldn't come into the judgment hall. That were disqualifying them from shedding blood for the remission of sin in the Passover there.
Okay.
You see, and they wanted to show they had the seal of God, which is the Sabbath. And so they went to Pilate and said, hurry, hurry, quick. And they were so relieved when he died before sundown. And they could go home and sing, we are your chosen few, O day of rest and gladness. We have the seal of God, and there's nothing in our stomachs or in our pantries at home that you have ever forbidden. And they were the worst enemies God ever had. Now, Ellen White, commenting at Minneapolis, she said, if Jesus had appeared at Minneapolis before the ordained delegates at that session and presented the truth that he had when he was here the first time, many of the delegates would have treated him in exactly the same way as those unbelieving Sabbath keepers at the foot of the cross. And I did not hear that quoted at the 100th anniversary of Minneapolis in 1988. She says the devil had a great victory at Minneapolis, which resisted the Spirit and delayed the second coming and the gospel going to all the world. And the next paragraph is, and we're not to picture God like that anymore. Read the exact words. And that letter explaining that I've just cited to you was mailed to Uriah Smith, editor of the Review, and he filed it, and it was not known for 56 years. And because that and one other magnificent explanation of the plan of salvation that she wrote in connection with Minneapolis, because those are never used, I had the privilege near the anniversary day in the University Church of preaching on the mystery of the missing Minneapolis manuscripts, which led the staff to suggest passing out M&Ms in the vestry. People came in. But that's very serious.
I need to back up just a little bit, if that's okay.
You see what it did to them? Their wrong picture of God made them cruel.
Yes, yes.
They were pretentiously pious, but they were cruel, for it is a law that we become like the person we worship and admire. Therefore, misunderstanding the cross can make you like the one who said God is like this, arbitrary, vengeful, unforgiving, and severe. That's the danger. The plan of salvation involves the healing of all the damage that false picture of God has done.
Okay, let me back up, make sure I'm understanding. If I heard you correctly, you said the most general way to summarize what happened at the cross is to say, in the language of Paul, Jesus died to demonstrate the righteousness of God.
Yeah.
That's the most general, comprehensive statement we can make. Am I
And
correct?
the dire consequences of misunderstanding why Jesus had to die, which means reading the wrong thing into the words in Genesis, in the day you eat thereof, you'll die.
Okay.
It's building that, it's that fallacy of the assumed premise.
Yes.
It's assumed by almost all Christians.
Yes.
That sin leads to punishment, penalty, execution. Therefore, the plan of salvation is paying the bill so that God can justly forgive me.
If I understand you on that point, it is that the negative consequences of sin are intrinsic to sin itself and not extrinsically imposed upon the sinner from God. Is that correct?
It works, like she uses the word, it is a law that we become like the person we worship and admire. And that's why deeply pretentious and publicly pretentiously pious people who seem to be the leading spiritual people in the world may be at heart the most cruel. Persecutions, taking people to the stake. This was done by, apparently, the religious leaders of the Christian world. That's what it can do to you. And she says, Adventist ministers would have done it to Christ had he appeared at that meeting in Minneapolis. These are serious words.
So
therefore, I must go back and ask, what does that mean?
Yes, so when I look at the cross,
Mm-hmm.
I understand God's righteousness. I understand the dreadful intrinsic consequences of sin.
Yeah.
Those two things.
Yeah.
Anything else that I should understand there?
Well, many, many things. So much so that Ellen White says an hour a day thinking about the cross.
Yes.
So to illustrate, I stand there and I say, so this is what sin results in. Just looking at Jesus dying. And I'm saying, God, what are you doing to him? Little children would say, what's God doing to him? He isn't touching him. I hear God in the shadows there crying, oh, my son, how can I give you up? Because the son was crying, how can you give me up? Why have you let me go? And that's tremendous. And knowing what the questions are, I say, God, there's the answer. Sin does result in death, but you're not doing this to your son. And to think that you could have let us die. We deserve it. And that would have proved the truthfulness of your word, wouldn't it? But everyone would have assumed that you had killed us if we had died as sinners. So the one who came was God. No one could kill him. He said, I lay down my life of myself. No one can take my life from me. I have power to lay it down. I have power to take it up. The angels watched, and they knew it was God in human form dying. And they knew God wasn't killing his son. And then Ellen White says, well, the Father had come instead of the Son. History would have been exactly the same. So to have one of them doing something to another member of the Godhead, in a way, carefully stated, is the ultimate heresy. It is accepting the devil's picture of God. And so we have these charges that are listed so many times in Ellen White's writings, the charge that God is arbitrary. And we say, of course he is. He's the sovereign. He has a right to be. That's why he gave the Sabbath, an arbitrary test of obedience. Oh, forgive us those awful words. The Sabbath is to remind us of the truth about God, including the crucifixion. Every Sabbath I remember what he did Friday afternoon. All heaven waited for him to come up. And God said, no, I'm going to give you 24 hours like at the beginning of creation week to remember what I've done. That's why when he went up on Sunday, he said, was it enough? They got the message. And so Ellen White says the angels were confirmed in their loyalty for all eternity. And without the cross, without these answers, they would have been no more secure against apostasy and defection than the sinless angels in the beginning. She's full of that reference that he died for the sinless angels, not to take care of their sins.
Now, you once preached a sermon with that title here on campus.
Yes.
Jesus died for
Yeah, the sinless angels.
the sinless
The whole
angels.
year,
What
everybody.
did they gain from the death of Jesus?
And this is Colossians, this is Ephesians.
Right.
It's right there in the scriptures.
What did the sinless angel...
I think what they learned was that an erroneous picture of God, and the arch accuser has with great skill painted him falsely. He won 1/3 of the brilliant angels. And she even goes into detail that in Old Testament times, as the angels watched sinners in the days of the judges misbehaving so badly, they said, God, why don't you in justice move in? In fact, she's very dramatic. She said, if only God had sent bolts from heaven to burn up his opponents in those days, the sinless beings throughout the universe would have said, amen, you've won your case, you know. He'd have lost. Instead of doing that, he sent his son. The angels, right up until the cross, wondered why God would not use his power. In fact, when he was surrounded by his tormentors, there was a stir among the angels. If he wasn't going to save himself, they would. And the leaders of the angels had to say, stand back. You're about to see the answer. And many Christians today want to use force. And you can use force in many ways. You can destroy people in many ways. If we use anything other than the truth expressed in love, we are using the methods of the adversary, which makes us look weak.
Yes.
And the disciples went into hiding after he died. When he said, it's finished, they said, yep, we're all finished. Mercifully, John went to the cross. And that's why he's the one who wrote, what I want is to you to be my understanding friends. And the one who said, the Father loves you just as much as I do. He's the one that puts that all in there.